Okay, good morning, good afternoon, welcome wherever you are in the world. And I'd like to welcome you to panel 5 of the 14th annual Lemon Project Spring Session. This session is going to be on the Guardian's Legacies of Enslavement program, and it's called Atoning in the Present for the Injustices of the Past. So next slide. So if I could just introduce myself, my name is Ebony Riddell Bamber. I am director and your moderator for today. I want to thank you for choosing to join this session. There are really some amazing speakers and panels going on, including concurrently. So we welcome and value your interest in the program and your participation in this session. So you're going to hear from 3 incredible women today, who I'll just introduce briefly. So firstly, Dr. Cassandra Gooptar is a lecturer in the legacies of slavery, and she works for the University of Hull, which is in the United Kingdom. Secondly, you're going to hear from one of my Guardian colleagues, that is Wolfe-Robinson. She is the editor of the Cotton Capital series, and she is also assistant editor of the Guardian. And you're also going to hear from Sister Pat Gunn, who is the Gullah Geechee elder, who has engaged with the Guardian in terms of our editorial work in relation to the Cotton Capital series, which we'll hear more about, and who we've also been engaging with in relation to the programmatic elements of the project. Next slide. So what are we here to discuss? So we're here to explore the question, what might a restorative justice response to institutionalized transatlantic enslavement look like? And we're going to explore historical research, so a bit about what we've discovered with a particular focus on the enslaved people. We're going to look at the Guardian's response, truth-telling through journalism in relation to the life, heritage, and history of people of African descent. And we're going to start sharing the developing model for building participatory partnerships at the community level. So I think it's important to emphasize at this point that we don't have claim to have all of the answers here. We've just made a start, or the Guardian's just made a start in terms of its own journey of seeking to atone for its history, on the history of the founders and those founders' connection to transatlantic enslavement. We wanted to share a bit about what we've uncovered and what we've learned so far during that process. We also want to profile community perspectives on how a program like this should be run in a way that respects them and their wishes. And we felt that to share in that way would be complementary to the aims of this symposium. So we really welcome your feedback and sharing your experiences as we go. Next slide. So why has the Guardian launched a program of restorative justice? So I think that answer to that question is most beautifully put by Sarah Parker Ramon, an African-American abolitionist who traveled herself as a Black woman in the 19th century to Manchester in the United Kingdom, which is where the Guardian newspaper, which was known as the Manchester Guardian, was founded in 1821. And this is what she said: "When I walk through the streets of Manchester and I meet load after load of cotton, I think of those 8,000 cotton plantations on which was grown the $125 million worth of cotton which supply your market. And I remember not 1 cent of that money ever reached the hands of the laborers." So I think that sums up beautifully and powerfully why we're here. So I'll be handing over to Dr. Gooptar in a moment to talk a bit about the research that uncovered these connections. But in summary, I don't know if the next slide's coming up, Cassie. Thank you. So in summary, the Guardian was founded in 1821, as I said, in Manchester, and the Scott Trust, which funds the Guardian, commissioned academic research, which showed that the founder of the Guardian a John Edward Taylor, and at least 9 of the 11 other men that each gave him £100 to found the newspaper. They all had links to transatlantic enslavement. And one in particular, Sir George Phillips, also co-owned a sugar plantation in Hanover Parish in Jamaica, which is where my family are from. So the restorative justice program is looking across the Sea Islands region because of the connection to Sea Island cotton, but also to Jamaica. So the restorative justice elements of the program are spanning those 2 geographies, and there's more. Next slide. So I'm receiving the results of the research, or the initial phase of research. There's more to come. The Scott Trust needed to consider this question. What does it mean to be a progressive organisation that was born out of the profits of human bondage? And how could it work to support descendant communities in a meaningful, realistic and sustainable way? So that's the exact wording from the apology that was issued. So the general framework that they decided upon was this. So firstly, the importance of acknowledging what has taken place. So sharing transparently the full results of the research in line with truth-seeking and truth-telling. So those important elements of reparative justice. Secondly, obviously, it was about apologizing. That's an important starting point. And after the apology comes, so what? And that's where the action comes in, and that's where the restorative justice and other elements of the program, which I'll talk about shortly, come in. The action was around announcing the intention to work with descendant communities in Jamaica and the Sea Islands to seek to atone for this history that had been shared. Next slide. So moving on, this is a bit of a summary. I've already spoken a bit about the research and the restorative justice elements, but this gives a bit of a broader overview of all of the elements of the program. So as I said, the research is continuing, and I'll hand over to Dr. Cassandra Gooptar in a moment to talk a bit more about how she set about doing that and what she discovered. Secondly, redress. So these developing partnerships across Jamaica and the Sea Islands that we're currently scoping, and we're going to continue to do so for the rest of the year, and hope that by early 2025 we have some concrete proposals for partnerships. Thirdly, reckoning. The programme wants to play a role in telling this full story about Manchester, cotton and enslavement, and the links between transatlantic enslavement and the prosperity and growth of the United Kingdom in general, which is not a story that everyone is willing to hear or engage in, but we really want to be part of shifting that. And then finally, the accountability work, which is more of the core work that The Guardian carries out as a media organisation, and we are expanding correspondent roles and editorial formats to cover issues that matter to people of African descent globally. So there's new reporter roles. We have 2 new colleagues in Guardian US working across race and equity. We are about to announce new correspondents in Caribbean, in the South America, specifically Brazil to start with, and also in East and West Africa. We're also expanding our work to increase roots into journalism and more diversity across journalism and the media. So those are the kind of overarching elements of the programme, and we'll hear a bit more about some of that from Cassie and also Maya later. Just before I hand over to Cassie, just to emphasise in relation to the restorative justice elements of the programme, that we're aiming to build both in the Sea Islands and Jamaica. You know, we've started some of that work. We've conducted a couple of scoping visits. We've been having a lot of conversations with people and being very clear that we want to listen and learn to understand different priorities for repair. We've met many Gullah Geechee elders. We've met senior leaders from the CARICOM, Caribbean Nations Reparations Commission, local representatives, civil society groups, church groups, school leaders, reparations experts. There's much more to do, but I think it's important to state here that we're really grateful for the time and deep thought and grace that has been afforded to us throughout these interactions. We know that these are not easy issues to discuss, and we recognize the emotional energy that goes into engaging in discussions about reparative justice. So we thank those that are engaging and that will engage with us going forward. Yeah, this process is really important because we can't understand what repair looks like until we invest in that process in full. So with that, I'm going to hand over to our first panelist, Dr. Cassandra Gooptar, who's going to speak a bit about the research, and then we'll move on to the journalistic response, and then also hear from Sister Pat in terms of community conceptions of repair. So Cassie, Dr. Cassandra Gooptar, I should say, but I know you as Cassie. Over to you.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Ebony. So just to move on with my presentation, so I will cover, my name is Dr. Cassandra Gooptar, and I will be focusing on the research aspect of the Guardian Legacies of Enslavement project. I'm the lead researcher on the Guardian Legacies of Enslavement project, and I'm currently a lecturer at the University of Hull. Okay, so before I get into the details about the process of uncovering the Guardian links with slavery, I just want to give a little bit of background because I know a lot of our audiences, they may not be aware of the current situation in the UK or some of the details about what's happening in terms of legacies of slavery research in the UK. So in terms of the socio-political context, as you will all be aware of, the Black Lives Matter movement really put a lot of focus finally onto the issue of race and slavery, including in the UK. And when I say put it into focus, I don't mean in the sense that people suddenly are becoming aware. I mean at a structural level, a lot of institutions, universities started paying attention and started to put their money where their mouths were. And so they actually started submitting applications for PhD researchers or postdoctoral researchers, trying to find people to conduct research on this topic. So I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and when I first came to the UK, I did not see any of these jobs on legacies of slavery being advertised. But then 2020 hit, and Black Lives Matter protests hit all over the UK. And then you started seeing a lot of jobs suddenly popping up. And there are various reasons for this. It could be genuine, it could be to appease critics, it could be because of calls from students and staff of an institution wanting to find out more about what is the legacy of slavery of the institution they are working for. So it was a turning point. In terms of historical research, there is still a lack of commissioned research, specifically within the context of the UK. And there are still commissioned studies that are they're ongoing or they're not being published. So I just want to talk about what are some of the reasons for the lack of commissioned research, despite there being such a focus or spotlight on this issue in the media or from the ground. So in terms of the UK context, there is still a lack of institutionally and individually sanctioned research dedicated to exploring these links with slavery. Now, in my experience, and from having various experience with the heritage sector as well as university sector here and institutions like the Guardian, this partly stems from a lack of investment in the topic from the top, the discomfort or the inconvenience that a lot of the senior people may feel towards this research. And there's the concept of what next. So if you find links with slavery, what do we do next? And there's a fear of backlash, there's confusion. How many, if we're doing, what type of reparations are we going to consider? Who do we engage with? And what is happening now as well is that there are many PhD funded and student focused research happening in the UK. And this is a positive thing for PhD students, but it also means that a lot of institutions are advertising PhD clusters or PhD funded programs with a predetermined topic, and then they pay the students get a scholarship to conduct this research. So there is a lack of commissioned research, but there are various reasons for it, and it's benefits some, and it's to the detriment of some others. So in terms of how many reports have been out, as in the US, you might well be aware of all of the reports. For the Guardian report, I remember when we were doing the first phase of the Guardian research, the Brown University report really helped us, Georgetown University as well. There are several other universities, William and Mary, Columbia University, Harvard. I'm not going to name all, but there are many universities in the US exploring their past connections. The UK has followed suit as well. Glasgow University was one of the first universities in the UK that looked at their links with slavery, and this was in 2018. And they committed their reparations. They pledged 20 million, and they're working with University of the West Indies and engaging with descendant communities in the Caribbean. There are several other universities: Bristol College, University College London, Nottingham, and Oxford, Cambridge as well. And then there are institutions such as the Guardian, the Church of England, Lloyd's of London, that I'm sure you would see making headlines all the time, that are also conducting self-investigations into their links with slavery. So moving on to talk about the Guardian specifically. So when I was hired to do this report, it was in 2020, so right in the heels of the Black Lives Matter movement, and it was only commissioned for about 3 months. So we submitted this report in 2020 to the Guardian. That was the first phase of the research. There was a second phase of research. The Scott Trusts are the owners of the Guardian, Legacies of Enslavement report. And this is the report that really helped us establish the connection with the US and the Guardian, and understanding that the cotton was coming from the US Sea Islands. And then the third report was in 2022 we submitted. And this was the most important, in my opinion, because it highlighted the names of the enslaved people connected to the Guardian founder and his cotton links. So in all, the report spanned about 2 years, but the research itself was about roughly 9 to 10 months because there was gaps in between. So all of these reports are publicly available, and you can find it on this website. So in terms of how we uncovered the Guardian founders' links to slavery, this as well, you can find an article on this if you Google it, but I'll just take you through it as well. So firstly, this document was one of the most important documents in helping us to pinpoint who are we going to conduct research on. So this is the contract, this is the agreement that funded the Guardian. So the owner of the Guardian, this guy, John Edward Taylor, he did not have enough money to start the Guardian. So he borrowed £100 in 1821 from 11 people. So all of their names are in this contract right now. And those were the people that we were tasked with finding out what were their links with slavery. They were all based in Manchester. And Manchester, as you might know, was Cottonopolis. So it was built by cotton, and cotton ran through everything. So we suspected that there were certain links with slavery already. So basically that was the starting point. John Edward Taylor, he was the main focus of the research as the founder of the Manchester Guardian. And we use various sources. Some of this, anyone looking to trace links with slavery, they're freely, in the UK, I mean, for UK prominent people or in institutions, there are freely accessible trade directories online. And this directory helped us identify what were the trades and commodities that these men were involved with. So just to highlight, in terms of the methodology for the report, the first section, as I said, the first step was to ascertain who are we going to look at. That was basically looking at the contract and family trees, things like that. The second one was trying to find out, was to follow the money, basically. So we're just following the money, trying to find out where the cotton was coming from, where the sugar was coming from. And then also identifying trade and commodities would help us to understand more about whether they were enslavers, whether they were linked as in a different way to the enslaved people. So that was the third step. The fourth step was looking at additional people, because there are always people on the fringe, like someone married into money, married into slavery-derived wealth. So that was also something that we considered. And the fifth and number 5 was looking at where did the wealth that they received from cotton, where did it go into Manchester or the UK or into the Caribbean? Are there institutions named after them? Are there buildings named after them? Things like that. And then the next step was also by itself was to look at who were the enslaved people connected with the founders of the Guardian. So moving right along, this basically highlighted, this was the first smoking gun. This showed that John Edward Taylor was a cotton and twist merchant. But the main thing in this article, this little snippet, is that he was agent for a company called the Struts. The Struts were one of the largest raw cotton manufacturers at the time. And that was really what helped us trace Taylor's wealth to the US. So basically, in terms of the US connection, so these two snippets are from an invoice book that was found in the Struts archive. And so basically, this showed, you can see the name of Taylor's firm at the top there, Shuttleworth Taylor and Company. So it highlighted that Taylor's company was importing cotton from the US Sea Islands, because this invoice book contained only information about the US Sea Islands, which we didn't know at the time, but when we looked through it, I realized that all of these people were Sea Island enslavers. Baynard is a prominent name. Most people in Sea Island may have heard of that name. Hutchinson Island is another island in the Sea Islands. So basically, from 1822 to 1823, the founder of the Guardian was importing cotton from the US Sea Islands. Stick there up to Sea Islands. And so basically what this showed us is that how John Edward Taylor and members of his partnership were indelibly linked to the enslaved people of the Sea Islands and their descendants, the Gullah Geechee community. All of this helped to underpin the restorative justice element of this project. And just to highlight that it was very important for us to find any names that we could on the enslaved people. So we traced the enslavers, and then we found out what plantations those enslavers were connected to, and then looked at the list of contraband names, wills, basically anything I could find, the probate records, which would have some names of enslaved people. There were bill of sale, which was another source. There were the U.S. Census, which contained slave schedules, which would highlight some of the names of the enslaved people. Anything we could find that basically highlighted anything to do with the stories of the lives of the enslaved people. The Freedmen's Land Certificate Bureau as well was quite helpful as well. Just to, I don't want to take up too much time again, but yeah, I'm almost finished. The Sea Islands, Ebony, myself, and a colleague at The Guardian, we visited the Sea Islands to meet with the communities. And I put this picture here because I think this picture resonated with me a lot. This was in Hilton Head Island, and it shows a cemetery that descendants of the enslaved people and enslaved people themselves were buried. And if you look there, it's like a little corner of this very, very affluent neighborhood. And I think in the 90s, people had to pay to enter this closed compound to visit their deceased, their loved ones. And so it was just a poignant reminder of gentrification, all the hardships that's happening in the Sea Islands, the loss of stories. And so all of this research really resonates, always having real world impact, because we're now looking at things like this. How can we help engaging with communities there? So it was quite interesting to visit there. This is the Baynard ruins. So I just talked about Baynard. So this is an image of Stony Baynard ruins. The Baynards was one of the family linked to the founder of The Guardian. So in terms of the US research, it will continue, and we will further, research is currently ongoing to help us to further understand the plantation, the enslavers, and most importantly, who the enslaved people connected to the Manchester Guardian. That's the original name of The Guardian, and how they were connected through cotton. So research is still ongoing. As I mentioned, to close off my presentation, we have ongoing work on Jamaica and Brazil. I wanted to end my presentation with talking about one of the findings in Jamaica to further demonstrate the value of historical research and its importance in healing and restorative justice. These are the 11 members who I said helped found the Guardian. The one I want to focus on is on George Phillips. He's at the bottom there. He was found to be an enslaver in Jamaica. So that is why some of our restorative justice, the elements of our project are focused in Jamaica. And this is my last slide. I just want to show, this is a picture of a church in Jamaica called Gurney's Mount Baptist Church. Now what led us there is in my research, finding out about the plantation that was owned by George Phillips, I came across the names of some of the enslaved people on that plantation. It was called Success Plantation. One of the people on the plantation, his name was Granville, and he was involved in Christmas uprising, which was one of the largest uprisings in Jamaica. And what I found with further digging is that I found that he was likely eventually executed, but he was instrumental in the Christmas uprising, and he was a member of this church that existed since then, since 1831. So, to my surprise, this church still exists today in Jamaica. It looks the same. And so we visited this church, we talked with the pastor and the schools there. So it's just a highlight that there is such an intertwinement with the research and the impact it can have on descendant communities or the restorative justice element. And so it just further highlights the value or the importance in this type of research in uncovering stories about the lives of enslaved people, and is an example of how legacies of slavery research is very much, just intertwined with the restorative justice element. And I just want to say the research is continuing also on this Jamaica and Brazil strand, as well as the US strand of research. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Cassie. And I'm sure that there are questions and lots of follow-ups to what you've just heard, but please, we have time at the end to ask questions. So if you've got any questions for Cassie, please note them down. It was wonderful to see that image of Gurney's Mount Church. We were just there in January, and the history of Granville is one that they are very proud and likely to be one that we will work with them to memorialise going forward. So I'm now going to hand over to Maya Wolfe-Robinson, who is assistant editor of The Guardian, and she was the editor of the Cotton Capital series. So she's going to talk to us about journalism as truth-telling. So over to you, Maya.
Thank you, Ebony and Dr. Gooptar. So I suppose I sort of came in where Dr. Gooptar left off in terms of having done the research. And as Dr. Gooptar said, lots of institutions are perhaps wary of commissioning this type of research because they're not sure about the what next. I'd like to think that we didn't quite have that challenge in terms of we didn't want to think about the what next, because we were lucky enough that one of the members of the Scott Trust who owns The Guardian was David Olusoga, a kind of very well-known historian in the UK who has focused a lot on the histories of enslavement and empire in his own work. And so he knew from the beginning that there was likely to be a what the research was likely to show, but we had no idea. And I think he was extremely kind of pleasantly surprised at the depth of research and detail that Dr. Gooptar and her colleagues were able to find, because that gave us, it could point us to specific communities, and to be able to kind of find documents and names provided not only a kind of a richness to the research that we could kind of put out there, but also guided the restorative justice response as well as our journalism. So I think the challenge for the Scott Trust at the point when they received the research was kind of twofold. First, what was the kind of institutional response? How would the Scott Trust respond as an institution? And secondly, how would we as a media organisation explain to our readers, viewers and listeners? So it's not just people who buy the newspaper, but we have a global audience of millions who read on the website, they watch our videos, they listen to our podcasts. And how do we take these three very rich and detailed academic papers and kind of translate that for our readers? And I think we were kind of uniquely placed as a media organisation, perhaps compared to some other institutions that have done this work, say financial institutions or universities, that we did have this kind of platform and this audience. And so we had this real opportunity to use our journalism for truth-telling, to educate and inform and amplify the voices of those who have been doing this work. So I just wanted to guide you through a little bit of our approach to that. Next slide, please. So I won't go into it too much because Ebony did touch upon our institutional response, but it did start with an apology from the Scott Trust. So I've quoted a little bit of it here. It was very importantly, it was addressed to the descendants of the enslaved, and it spelled out exactly what the apology was for. So as the owners of the Guardian, the Scott Trust apologises to the affected communities identified in the research and surviving descendants of the enslaved for the part the Guardian and its founders had in this crime against humanity perpetrated against their ancestors. The apology then went on to say that these connections are as relevant to the Guardian's origin story as the 1819 Peterloo massacre. And they pose a fundamental question for us. What does it mean to be a progressive organisation that was born out of the profits of human bondage? And it then later on said that they were deeply sorry for the role that Taylor and his backers played in the cotton trade, which benefited from the forced labour of enslaved people in the Americas, but also for Philip's direct enslavement of people in Jamaica, and also for the role the paper's journalism played in supporting the economy of enslavement. And you can see there, that was the front page of the newspaper on the day after the Scott Trust issued that apology. Next slide, please. So as Ebony said, the Scott Trust laid out a 10-year plan of restorative justice, and this is what was announced by the Scott Trust last year. This came together, it was, there was a subcommittee of Scott Trust members, Guardian staff, but also importantly external experts on reparations and repair. And there was some initial conversations with both Jamaicans and people from the Gullah Geechee community who we shared the research with before publication. So just in brief, the plan included a restorative justice fund to support community projects and programs. And as Ebony explained, there's work going on at the moment to scope out further what that looks like in partnership with those communities. Then there was the question of what does finding this information out about where we came from, where the funding for this news organisation came from, how does that change us today? How does that change what it is that we do? And so the pledge was to create 12 new journalism roles across the Black diaspora. So I'm really excited that a year on from launching, we have appointed 7 of those. And so we have 2 brand new correspondents starting in West and East Africa who will join our colleagues already existing there. They start as well as a new post in South America, a new post in the Caribbean, which is one of the few Caribbean correspondents for a international news organization, as well as new roles that are focusing on race and equity in the UK and the US. We've also expanded our existing bursary scheme, but we've expanded it, we've doubled it in the UK for prospective Black journalists. We are working to create a news fellowship for mid-career Black journalists. And we're also looking to partner with other institutions and community programs with a strong focus on Manchester, where we were founded and where I'm based. And as we've heard from Dr. Gooptar, we'll continue to fund research. Okay, next slide. So in a minute, I will play this video, but I just wanted to sort of take you through some of the things that we had in mind when we were thinking about the next challenge. So aside from the institutional response, how do we approach this journalistically? And Catherine Viner, who's the Guardian's global editor-in-chief, wrote a piece when we launched, and she said, she quoted James Baldwin, and it's who wrote that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so when we were approaching this challenge of taking the research and transforming it into journalism, and sort of truth-telling as a principle of repair, we were thinking about how do we face this? How do we face this? And how do we approach it, given that we are journalists, not historians, and our audience is vast, but with varying levels of knowledge about this subject. So some of the things when we were conceptualizing the project, which came to be known as Cotton Capital, and By the way, that has kind of varied levels of meanings. One was a reference to the fact that Manchester was the cotton capital of the UK, but it was also representing the fund of money that started the Guardian, the capital, and how that principally derived from cotton, as well as a nod to the way in which the years in which enslaved people were just seen as a form of capital, a form of enrichment for others. So the things that we wanted to bear in mind was the context. So whilst it was really important that we really well covered what the research found out about the Guardian, and we wanted to kind of find the balance between the detail that an academic paper is able to go into and what a lay reader could take in. But we needed to kind of show that it wasn't just us. It was that the Guardian was part of a wider global system, so that our history is also Manchester's history, and that is also Britain's history. And that wasn't to say, you know, excuse it or minimize it. It was to say, you know, it wasn't just that, you know, the Guardian was one bad apple. It was to show that this is a deeply embedded system. We also wanted to take what might seem like a local story that's just about Manchester, but we wanted to show that actually these are global stories, these are global histories, and they're all connected. So historically, Britain's kind of discourse around its history of enslavement is based on a series of myths, essentially that Britain's kind of main role was abolition. There's a famous quote from Caribbean historian Eric Williams, who said, you know, that the British historians write almost as if Britain had introduced slavery solely for the satisfaction of abolishing it. And that is something that still really rings true. You know, that people really are more comfortable with a focus on abolition rather than what preceded abolition. I think that there's also, in terms of our level, the kind of public understanding and knowledge. You know, as one historian said to me, our deep south is on the other side of the world in the Caribbean. And so we don't have, there isn't that, because, you know, Britain and the UK, if you scratch the surface, these signs are everywhere in our built environment and you can see them, but we have just a different relationship, and there is that ability for these myths to take hold because of that kind of physical distance. And I'd also say that the level of involvement with American slavery was really not very well known at all, and that's why we really wanted to focus on it. So whilst there was the slave trading period, and then there was enslavement on British plantations in the Caribbean, the next phase, even after we'd abolished both of those things, the next phase, which was through cotton and largely in the United States, but also in Brazil, was really not very well known at all. So that's why we kind of really wanted to focus in on that aspect of history, because we felt like that's where we could have a most impactful role, really, because no one else had really kind of focused on that. And we wanted to just connect these stories. We wanted to connect, you know, the Caribbean and Brazil and Africa and the United States and the UK, and show that these are all parts of the same story. And then we also thought about formats. I think accessibility was very important to us. So whilst there are some kind of very long, beautifully written and essays, we also wanted, we kind of recognize that not everyone is able to kind of sit down and read and consume that level of information. We know that our audience finds us in a variety of different places, and different people consume things in different ways. So we wanted to make sure there was something for everyone. So we had kind of news Q&As, we had opinion pieces, we had a newsletter, we had the long essays that I referenced, but we also had interactive articles for those who like to kind of consume information visually. We had a 6-part audio series. We had a video explainer, as well as posts on TikTok and Instagram. So I'll just play this video, and that'll give you a little bit of an overview on what we published, and then maybe I'll go into detail on some of them. Are we going to get this to work? Cassie, I think you're operating the slides. Is that working for you in your browser?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not working for the rest of us, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we can come back to it, Maya.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So then I just wanted to talk about some of the individual elements that we did. So this was a print magazine. We gave away a special magazine with the Saturday edition of the newspaper, which has traditionally got the largest audience. And it was a magazine to give our readers the full picture, to show the significance of this moment in The Guardian's history. And perhaps I should just say, for those that don't know much about The Guardian as an institution, we not only we have a very unique ownership model, so our sole owners are this organisation called the Scott Trust, but they do not run at a profit, and their sole purpose is to keep the Guardian going in perpetuity. And we have editorial independence for them, so we don't have a kind of billionaire profit-seeking owner. But we also our primary business model is that we are supported by our readers' voluntary contributions. So we don't have a paywall on the site, and that's very important to us, because we want a huge amount of people to be able to access us for free. But we ask our readers who appreciate our journalism and who can, to give us voluntary contributions. And the Guardian is a progressive news organisation. We were founded with kind of clear liberal values by these cotton merchants. So, you know, we did publish a lot at looking at kind of that interpretation of liberalism and how they kind of squared that with their desired values. But that is what we're known as. So I just say that to give the background, as we have quite a unique, I think, relationship with our readers. They feel very close to the Guardian. It's part of their identity, being a Guardian reader or a Guardianista, as some people sort of say, is a kind of very kind of deep relationship. So we knew that our readers and journalists had long been inspired by the story of our founding in Manchester by these liberal reformists. And we wanted to be clear that that story is still true. We're not saying that that wasn't true, but there was a new chapter to add to that history. And it's not a rewriting of the past, but it's a deeper and more complex understanding of our past. And so we just, the magazine, we kind of wanted everything to reflect that. So I just want to show you that the front page there, what we did is that we took the first front page in 1821 of the first ever edition of the newspaper and printed it wove it onto a cotton tapestry. And then the cotton tapestry was unwoven by hand. And so that's the photo that you can see. And that unweaving was supposed to represent what we were doing here, what the work that Dr. Gooptar and her colleagues were doing and what we were seeking to explore. And then on the back page of the magazine, which I'll just hold up, you could see the kind of back page of the magazine, which showed the other side of the tapestry, the side that you don't normally see, which is the messy stitching, the kind of the bits that are left undone. And we wanted to be clear that what we were attempting to do here was to show it all, to show the whole truth, even the bits that are not pretty and don't make us feel good. And then I just wanted to show the back page of the magazine, which, as Cassie said, she was able to trace the names of some of the enslaved people whose forced labour ended up to contribute towards the Guardian founding, and it was really important to us to show their names so that people could say their names, and for that to be for that to kind of be part of this new chapter. So that was an element in print. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I said, I'm not going to go into each piece individually, because you can read it all on the website. And please do, if you just Google Guardian Cotton Capital, it's there. But I just wanted to sort of also say about some of the things about our approach. So one thing that was really important to us was uplifting the voices of people who have been telling these stories for years and fighting for justice. we wanted to make it clear that, you know, just because we had arrived on the scene and decided, you know, the Scott Trust had decided to do this research, we were aware that this was not news to a lot of people, and that a lot of people had been trying to shout about these connections and these histories and these stories for years before. And so we wanted to pay tribute to as many of them as we could. So just this is some of the photography that was taken for a beautiful piece of reportage by Deneen L. Brown, which was titled White Gold from Black Hands, the Gullah Geechee Fight for Legacy, and shows in the middle Gullah Geechee ancestors, as well as those who are active in the community now. So we have Emery Campbell in the bottom right, and then if we go around anti-clockwise, Doniella Chives, Maurice Bailey, and then Sister Pat Gunn, who we're going to hear from. Next slide. Photography and art was also really important to us. We knew that alongside campaigners in the community, so many in the world of visual arts have been exploring the themes of enslavement, colonialism, racism, and injustice, again, for decades. So we decided to ask some amazing Black artists to create portraits in whatever medium they wanted of certain figures that we had picked out to showcase. And that was for a series called The Radicals, and they were radical figures from over spanning kind of a 200 years, and who all were connected to either through their work or their lives, or they had visited to, or they had tried to disrupt Manchester cotton slavery or the legacies of it. So we asked artists to do portraits for each one, and then we also asked poets and writers, including, for example, Moormother, who for those that don't know, she's an artist. She just released an album a few weeks ago exploring enslavement. And these creative writers did pieces of creative writing to go alongside the kind of biographies. And these particular portraits here, we have the portrait of Sarah Parker Ramond, who Ebony referred to earlier, and Frederick Douglass. And the artists are Claudette Johnson and Keith Piper. Thank you. Next slide. So another important part, so alongside words and pictures, we wanted to really lean heavily on audio. I think there's something powerful and special about audio, because you can not only give a real sense of place, but you can hand over so that people can be heard in their own words. So the podcast series started in Manchester, then we went to Jamaica, including to the Gurney's Mount Baptist Church. Then we also went to Brazil, Georgia and the Gullah Geechee corridor, and ended in London at our headquarters. And the idea was to tell listeners our history, put it in the context of enslavement in each place, but also explore the ongoing legacies that remain to this day in each place. And if this works, what I'd like to do is play a little bit from the Jamaica episode. And this was a kind of a storytelling device that we used in this episode. We worked with a brilliant writer and historian, Zakia Mackenzie, who's Jamaican, and she wrote dramatized scenes and then read them for us, based on what Dr. Gooptar had discovered and her knowledge of enslavement in Jamaica. So Dr. Gooptar mentioned Granville and his story, and Zakia wrote scenes around that research. So should we try and see if we can play a little bit? It's just a short clip.
Can you hear anything? See anything?
No, I think the settings aren't working for us.
Okay.
We might have to come back to this as well. I have asked perhaps if the Lemon Project team could, at the end or before the Q&A, reshare the screen, because I think they can access the link. So we might have to come back to that. Apologies.
Maya, can you see the screen? Is it fine? Oh, thanks.
Yeah, if we could move to the last slides. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, I just wanted to end this showing the response that we got from other media outlets, which was really varied. So we have the New York Times on the far left, who ran a quite in-depth story on the project and the restorative justice program, and then they put it on their front page. Then we have The Sun. For those that don't know, it's one of the most popular tabloid newspapers in the UK. And that was in response to a story we wrote, which pointed out that the football teams, Manchester United and Manchester City, both have a symbol of a ship on their crests, which is one of the symbols of Manchester. And we wrote an article pointing that out, just saying where that had come from and how the ship was a symbol of the cotton trade. And they responded with sort of hysteria is one way of putting it, perhaps, including a front page dedicated "Ship hits the fan, fury at woke bid to link badges to slave trade." And then that on the far right is a feature for the Trinidad Guardian. So just wanted to show that there was also kind of deep interest in the Caribbean. And I wanted to kind of show how the varied response we got from different media outlets, some of which was very negative, some of which was kind of neutral, some of which was fair. But most important for us was the response from descendant communities and from our readers. And I just wanted to say that this was overwhelmingly positive. So apart from a large readership for the journalism, we received hundreds of emails from our readers saying how glad they were to learn this information and make the connections that they hadn't been taught at school. That was a real theme of people saying, I just cannot believe I didn't know so much of this. People in Manchester said, I just never thought about where the cotton was coming from, even though cotton does not grow in the UK. You know, they knew that the nickname was Cottonopolis, but they never thought about where it came from. But we also heard from people in the US who said, we never thought about where the cotton was going. We held an online live event, had a record-breaking 5,000 signups in 3 days. Our newsletter was one of our sort of quickest, fastest growing launches. The magazine, which we are selling through the bookshop, has been sold around the world. And I'm saying that, and it's not to brag or sort of say how great we are. It's to say that I want to just make the point that despite the kind of backlash, I think it's really important to hold in mind that there's a real hunger for this work. And whilst we might recognize and know that from our own communities, that's not reflected very often by a lot of politicians and some media outlets. And so I just wanted to kind of make that clear that whilst you were looking, oh, you know, what was the response to this, you might not get a particularly accurate picture. So, you know, whilst looking back, there may have been decisions that we could have done differently, and I'm sure there will be more of those. Our experience has been that if you are seen and understood to be acting honestly and openly in good faith, truth-telling in this area is received and well, and lots of people want to be our partners with that, in collaboration in that.
Thanks so much, Maya. And once again, so much to explore and follow up on. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. I want to now invite Sister Pat Gunn, Gullah Geechee elder, who we're incredibly grateful to her for joining us today to share her time and wisdom. We'd like to invite Sister Pat to share her perspective and recommendations on how to build and sustain community partnerships for repair, and hear about her work day in, day out, which is very much about honouring the ancestors, and is very much in line with the theme of this whole event, which is healing through Black history, families and community. So Sister Pat, please.
Yes, I am so honored to be here with you. This is an opportunity to thank the Guardian for the phenomenal work you've done in educating the world about the transatlantic slave trade and all the participants that are all over the world. And so the Gullah Geechee community on the coast of Georgia is where I am, and I am Gullah Geechee and very proud to be Gullah Geechee, a descendant of those tribes. 8 tribes have been identified on the coast of Georgia that came through by the transatlantic slave trade. So I'm honored to represent the Gullah Geechee community. For those that are not familiar, the Gullah Geechee community is a federally protected corridor in the United States. It's 4 official states. It's North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And it was established in 2008 as a federal corridor. There are approximately 2.5 million descendants that can be traced back to those countries that came here for the process of others making money on human beings, or as they say, human cargo. So yes, we're talking about cotton and rice and indigo and corn and wheat and hay, and not so much sugarcane, but that was an industry too, because you're talking about the routing that we know of as Savannah, where the ships sail to England. And we're talking about Liverpool, Manchester, and Bristol. And then from there, you go into West Africa to kidnap your enslaved. And then you drop some off in the Caribbean basin to grow sugarcane and to crossbreed. And then you come back to Savannah. And so that's the landscape in which I grew up. So when I hear the subject matter of restorative justice and how it can help, there are just so many facets. It's like, what has slavery done to the African continent, as well as where we were spread around the world? There's different parts. I mean, we're talking about psychosis, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about ongoing criminal justice inequities and violence, and men losing their lives every day by police officers and women. It's just a lot of things that have happened that were directly resulting from the transatlantic slave trade. And so I'm honored to be a 4th generation descendant. There are 6 generations that I can trace. And my great-grandmother came here in 1848 and was sold in downtown Savannah. And she went to a plantation called Shellman Plantation. And she was one of those that came into McIntosh County and was sold downtown in what they call the weeping time. So there are strong ties here from the Gullah Geechee community to what has happened around the world. If you were to ask me again about restorative justice, I would say the first thing is what has already been done by the Guardian. You have acknowledged that it happened. You have apologized. I live in the 3rd port of entry in the United States where slave trades were held, Savannah, Georgia. And I walk an area every day where there's not an acknowledgement. We, the city of Savannah, and I quote them, say, we don't know where the enslaved were held down here. We acknowledge they were here through the ships coming into Lazaretta Creek, which is near Tybee Island. And we acknowledge the second stop is Savannah. We acknowledge the slave auction, but we don't know anything about holding slaves down here. And so my organizations have come together and we have identified those places. So the healing part is that you have acknowledged it happened. So I'm thanking you for that. And then if people say, how can we repair what happened to your people? There's not a number that you can place on it, but I feel deeply in my heart that there is unlimited value in apologizing and acknowledging it happened to a people. So kudos for that start, and maybe that is a precedent-setting phase. I remember when the Guardian group came to Savannah, and I remember when we sat for the breaking of bread. You know, you don't come to the Gullah Geechee community and not have bread, a dinner or supper or breakfast or something. And we sat down on a lovely Gullah Geechee afternoon and had a Gullah Geechee lunch buffet. And one of the first things I said to the Guardian group was, you are setting precedents for the entire world. And I'm so honored that you have come to see us. This is an amazing project. Restorative justice is cutting edge in the 21st century. And you're telling me that the descendants of enslaved are coming back generations later, acknowledging that it wasn't right, and they're ready to do some repair. The rest of my journey for the rest of my days will be 4 things. It will be truth telling, it will be reconciliation, it will be healing and repair. And I do that every single day when people come to visit us from all over the world. They don't know this history. So our job and opportunity, look at the wonderful projects you've done in Jamaica and Mississippi and the Carolinas here. You are educating the world. And so if you look at the 20th century and study the civil rights movement, I was a part of that. I want you to know that they did 3 things just so. They agitated America. Something is wrong. We've got 1964 public accommodations laws, but we still don't have equity. They educated America, and then they organized. And so if you agitate and educate and organize, which is what you guys are doing, then you can put the other pieces in there, which is the truth telling, the reconciliation, healing, and repair. And I think we can begin the business of healing the world because it is way overdue. It is way overdue. If you do the math, on this Saturday, Gullah Geechee people do not tell their age, you know. They'll tell you that we are women of a particular age. I have an elder who's 94, and she's a retired psychologist in Gullah Geechee, and we had a fancy dinner party for her, and she whispered and said, "Child, don't tell the people I'm 94. Tell the people I'm 90 and some change." And so I will share with you that I'm 60 and some change, and come Saturday, I'll have 1 more year. And I want to share with you that I am one of the daughters of the soil here in Georgia that drank from colored water fountains. I am one of 7 of 10 siblings that came down to Savannah, and up until 1971, even though we had desegregation in the 60s, it took Savannah until 1971 to desegregate. So if you go to a restaurant downtown, you'd have to go to what they call window services. And you would get an order outside and they would place it and you stand out there and wait for your order. So when you talk about restorative justice, we've got to restore the heart, we've got to restore the mind, we've got to restore the soul of the people, because our ancestors held on for a better day, and we are those descendants. And so I just wanted to say that it's a wonderful day when I can hear these words. Anything dealing with restoring, preserving, healing, I am all in. I am all in.
Thanks so much, Sister Pat. Do you mind also telling us a little bit about Susie King Taylor and your work around the square?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, we have 23 public squares in Savannah. I have been away from the city for 32 years in Atlanta, working in social justice for the American Civil Liberties Union. And so when I returned, I got involved in tourism, and a tourist came to me and said there is a square downtown that has enslaved burials there. And John C. Calhoun is on top of the burials of your ancestors. We investigated and found it to be true. There is a 3.5 acre radius of burials there of enslaved people, and there are Confederate gentlemen on top of them in terms of statues and markers. And so we thought it would be the right thing to request a name change for John C. Calhoun. He was the Vice President of the United States, an amazing attorney and orator, but he was all about pro-slavery. We also found out that he drafted the actual work on the Trail of Tears, where the indigenous people walked from Georgia to Oklahoma, and now he's on top of our ancestors. So we found an opportunity to not change the law, but to change the policy. So we went into the city to make application, and we wanted to change it from Calhoun Square to Jubilee Square, because Jubilee is what the enslaved said when they were freed in December 1864. The neighbors around this square are millionaires, and their houses are 5 million and up. And they said, we no longer want to have Calhoun here either. Who's your choice? And of course, I was ready with Susie King Taylor. Susie King Taylor, born in 1848, was the first African American nurse in the nation. She joined the Union side of the war. In Savannah, her grandmother was a friend of the abolitionist community. And to make a long story short, they taught her how to read, write, and count. Susie King Taylor joins the Union side by escaping on an actual floating raft. She and her grandmother and uncle, and they joined the Union side of the war in 1859, just 2 years before it began. They were down there helping with the fortifications. And so she started as a laundress and became a nurse trained by Clara Barton from the Red Cross. And so Susie King Taylor took care of the colored troops. And after the war, she started 3 freedom schools in Savannah. So it took us 3.5 years of agitating, educating, and organizing the downtown governments that this has to be renamed. We no longer want our public taxes to represent someone that's causing pain to another person or group of people. And so after 3.5 years lobbying and bringing together people in a coalition to rename Calhoun Square from all walks of life, we got a 9-0 decision to rename the square, and they renamed it in honor of Susie King Taylor. And on February 10th, just recently, we're so honored to tell you that we had the unveiling of the first public square in 290 years in honor of a woman and an African American. We have 21 public squares that are named in honor of men, one for the indigenous, and 290 years later, we have a woman named Square and an African American as a twofold. So we're just honored. And we say to people, say her name, Susie King Taylor.
And there we have the photo of Sister Pat after that amazing historic achievement, which may have been long overdue, but that doesn't make it less welcome. So thank you so much. We have 5 minutes. We've gone slightly over time, but I hope you found what you've heard from our 3 wonderful speakers enlightening. There has been some questions in the chat which we've already answered, but please, if you have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A, or I don't know if there's actually a facility for you to unmute yourself, but I think this is the final opportunity if you have any questions. Or is everyone being shy? Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm going to wrap up this panel. It's been a huge pleasure to speak to you today. We hope that you've enjoyed hearing about the Guardian Legacies of Enslavement program. We've put some links in the chat to the content, and we can also share those with the organisers afterwards in case you didn't get them. Finally, just to say that we hope that we can, through this program, keep on sharing what we're learning as we go. And we do hope to set a pathway for others, other institutions, organisations to step into this space of restorative justice. Thank you.